You know what's exhausting? The constant feeling that you're behind. Behind on your goals, behind on your dreams, behind on where you thought you'd be by now. Everyone else seems to have their life together while you're still trying to figure out what you even want. But here's the thing, nobody tells you. You're not behind. You're just not aligned yet. See, most people think being behind means they're failing at life. They look around and see other people getting promoted, buying houses, getting married, starting businesses, and they think something's wrong with them. But that's not how life works. That's not how any of this works. You're operating under the assumption that everyone's supposed to be running the same race, hitting the same milestones, following the same timeline. But what if that's complete nonsense? What if the reason you feel behind isn't because you're slow or lazy or broken? What if it's because you've been trying to live someone else's blueprint instead of creating your own? What if the restlessness you feel isn't a sign that you're failing, but a sign that you're finally ready to stop pretending and start being real about what you actually want? The truth is, most people who seem ahead aren't actually ahead. They're just really good at following directions. They took the path that was laid out for them, checked all the boxes, and convinced themselves that this is success. But deep down, many of them feel just as lost as you do. They're just better at hiding it behind the right job title, the right relationship status, the right social media presence. You, on the other hand, have been struggling because you couldn't force yourself to want what you're supposed to want. You couldn't fake enthusiasm for a life that doesn't fit. And that's not a weakness. That's integrity. That's your soul refusing to settle for a counterfeit version of living. But here's where it gets interesting. The feeling of being behind often comes from comparing your behind the scenes to everyone else's highlight reel. You see their promotion, but you don't see the anxiety they feel every Sunday night. You see their relationship, but you don't see the conversations they're not having. You see their success, but you don't see the parts of themselves they had to sacrifice to get there. Meanwhile, you're judging yourself for not having what they have, not realizing that what they have might not even be what you want. You're beating yourself up for not being further along on a path you never chose to walk in the first place. It's like being frustrated that you're losing a game you never wanted to play. The shift happens when you stop asking, why am I behind? And start asking, what am I actually moving toward? Because here's the secret that changes everything. You can't be behind on your own path. You can only be behind on someone else's. When you're aligned with what you actually want, when you're moving towards something that genuinely matters to you, the concept of being behind becomes irrelevant. You're not trying to catch up to anyone because you're not running their race, you're creating your own. Alignment isn't about having all the answers. It's about being honest about the questions. It's about admitting that maybe you don't want the corner office, maybe you don't want the big wedding, maybe you don't want to climb the ladder everyone else is climbing because you're not even sure you want to be on that building. This is why so many people feel stuck. They're waiting for motivation to strike, waiting for clarity to hit, waiting for the perfect moment to start. But motivation comes from movement, and movement comes from alignment. When you're aligned with something real, something that actually matters to you, you don't need to force yourself to take action. The action becomes natural. Think about it. When you're genuinely interested in something, when it truly resonates with you, you don't struggle to pay attention. You don't have to discipline yourself to care. You just do. That's alignment. That's what it feels like when you're moving in the right direction. But most people never experience this because they're too busy trying to want what they think they should want. They're trying to motivate themselves toward goals that don't actually inspire them. They're trying to align with a vision that isn't theirs. The reason you feel behind is because you've been measuring yourself against standards that don't apply to you. You've been trying to succeed at someone else's definition of success. You've been trying to live someone else's life and wondering why it doesn't fit. But what if you stopped trying to catch up? What if you stopped looking around to see where everyone else is and started looking within to see where you want to go? What if you realized that the path you're on is exactly where you need to be? Even if it doesn't look like anyone else's, here's what nobody tells you about finding your alignment. It's not about discovering some grand purpose or finding your one true calling. It's about paying attention to what already moves you. It's about noticing what you're drawn to when nobody's watching. It's about being honest about what energizes you and what drains you. Your alignment isn't hidden in some distant future. It's available right now in your preferences, your curiosities, your natural inclinations. It's in the things you find yourself thinking about when your mind wanders. It's in the conversations that light you up and the activities that make you lose track of time. But you've been so focused on where you think you should be that you've stopped paying attention to where you actually are. You've been so concerned with being behind that you've missed the signs pointing toward your actual direction. The people who seem most successful, most fulfilled, most alive, they're not necessarily the ones who achieved the most. They're the ones who aligned with what actually mattered to them. They're the ones who had the courage to stop running someone else's race and start walking their own path. And here's the beautiful thing about alignment. When you find it, when you really find it, you realize you were never behind. You were just taking the long way around to get to where you needed to be. Every detour, every mistake, every moment of confusion was preparing you for this alignment. The skills you developed in jobs you hated, the relationships that didn't work out, the dreams that fell apart, none of it was wasted. It was all gathering information about what you don't want, which is just as valuable as knowing what you do want. Your path doesn't have to look like anyone else's. Your timeline doesn't have to match anyone else's. Your version of success doesn't have to fit anyone else's definition. You get to create your own criteria for what a life well lived looks like. But first, you have to stop apologizing for not being further along. You have to stop treating your uniqueness like a problem to be solved. You have to stop seeing your different path as evidence that you're behind. What if your perceived lateness is actually perfect timing? What if your struggle to fit into conventional paths is actually your wisdom protecting you from a life that would never satisfy you? What if your feeling of being behind is actually your intuition, telling you that you're finally ready to step into alignment? The world doesn't need another person following the same script, checking the same boxes, living the same life. The world needs you to figure out what you're actually here to do. Not what you should do, not what would impress people, not what would make your parents proud, but what would make you feel alive. And that's not something you can rush. That's not something you can force. That's something you discover by being honest about who you are and what you want. That's something you find by paying attention to your own inner compass instead of everyone else's destination. You're not behind. You're just getting started. You're not late. You're right on time. You're not lost. You're just finally ready to stop following someone else's map and start creating your own. The question isn't why you're behind. The question is what you're moving toward. And once you figure that out, once you align with what actually matters to you, you'll realize that you were never behind at all. You were just taking the scenic route to exactly where you needed to be. Here's where everything starts to shift, because understanding that you're not behind is just the first step. The real transformation happens when you realize you're not aligned yet. And alignment isn't about forcing yourself to fit into someone else's blueprint. It's about discovering what actually resonates with your soul, what makes you feel alive, what creates that inner spark you've been searching for. Most people confuse alignment with perfection. They think it means having everything figured out, knowing exactly where you're going, having a clear 10-year plan mapped out in detail. But that's not alignment. That's control. And control is the enemy of authentic living because it keeps you rigid, anxious, constantly measuring yourself against some impossible standard. True alignment is more like tuning a guitar. You don't force the strings to be in tune. You listen, you adjust, you feel when something resonates correctly. And sometimes you have to tune multiple times before you play. Sometimes the weather changes and you need to retune. Sometimes a string breaks and you need to replace it entirely. Your life works the same way. Alignment is an ongoing process, not a destination. It's about paying attention to what feels right in your body, what energizes you rather than drains you, what makes time disappear because you're so absorbed in the moment. It's about noticing when you're forcing something versus when you're flowing with something. The people who seem to have it all figured out, they're not ahead of you. They're just more in tune with their own frequency. They've learned to trust their internal compass instead of constantly checking everyone else's map. They've stopped asking what they should be doing and started asking what they want to be doing. But here's what makes this process tricky. Society has trained us to ignore our internal signals. We've been taught to prioritize logic over intuition, to follow proven paths instead of forging our own, to seek validation from others instead of trusting our own judgment. We've learned to silence the very voice that could guide us toward alignment. Think about it. When was the last time you made a decision based purely on what felt right, without consulting 10 friends, reading 5 articles, or creating a pro and con list? When did you last trust your gut instinct without needing external confirmation? Most people have become so disconnected from their internal guidance system that they don't even know what their authentic preferences are anymore. Alignment starts with reconnecting to that inner voice. It means paying attention to your energy levels throughout the day. What activities make you feel more alive? What conversations leave you feeling inspired versus drained? What environments make you feel most like yourself? These aren't trivial questions. They're navigation tools. Your body is constantly giving you feedback about alignment. That feeling of expansion when you're doing something that fits. That sense of contraction when you're forcing something that doesn't. The way time seems to stretch when you're in flow versus how it crawls when you're misaligned. Most people ignore these signals because they've been taught that feelings aren't reliable data. But your emotions are information. They're telling you when you're moving toward alignment or away from it. That restlessness you feel isn't a character flaw. It's your soul telling you that you're not where you belong yet. That excitement you feel about certain possibilities isn't naive optimism. It's your internal compass pointing toward what's meant for you. The reason you feel behind is because you're trying to align with someone else's vision of success instead of discovering your own. You're measuring your progress against milestones that were never meant for you. You're forcing yourself into containers that were designed for different shaped souls. But when you start aligning with your authentic self, everything changes. You stop caring about timelines because you're not racing towards someone else's finish line anymore. You stop feeling behind because you're not following someone else's path. You start feeling curious instead of anxious, excited instead of pressured, purposeful instead of lost. This doesn't mean alignment is always easy or comfortable. Sometimes it means walking away from things that look successful but feel empty. Sometimes it means disappointing people who had different plans for your life. Sometimes it means choosing uncertainty over security, authenticity over approval, growth over comfort. The most aligned people you know have probably made decisions that seemed crazy to others. They've left good jobs to pursue unclear dreams. They've moved to places that felt right even when they couldn't explain why. They've said no to opportunities that looked perfect on paper but felt wrong in their gut. Alignment requires courage because it means trusting yourself more than you trust the crowd. It means believing that your internal guidance system is more reliable than external expectations. It means having faith that your unique path will lead somewhere meaningful, even when you can't see the destination clearly. But here's the beautiful part about alignment. When you're truly aligned, you don't need to force things anymore. Opportunities start appearing naturally, the right people show up at the right time, doors open that you didn't even know existed. Not because life becomes magical, but because you're finally moving in harmony with your true nature instead of against it. You're not behind, you're not broken, you're not failing. You're just learning to tune into your own frequency in a world that's been telling you to play someone else's song. And that's not a flaw in your character. That's the beginning of your real journey.